London in the late 18th century was a city of stark contrasts, a place where wealth and squalor existed side by side, where the glittering facades of opulent townhouses masked the secret lives of those who lived within them. From the outside, these grand homes projected order, civility, and refinement. A visitor would see only polished floors, crystal chandeliers, and the hushed elegance of well-dressed families going about their daily lives. Yet behind these walls, a different world thrived, one largely hidden from public view. It was a world populated by servants, footmen, maids, and cooks, individuals whose lives were bound entirely to the whims of the families they served. They worked tirelessly, invisible in their labor, yet intimately woven into the daily rhythms of their masters' households. Every meal prepared, every bed made, every fire stoked, and every errand completed reinforced their position, yet also reinforced their dependence. They were at once indispensable and powerless, trusted and yet utterly marginalized, living in a delicate balance where one small misstep could provoke punishment or scorn. In these households, loyalty was demanded but rarely freely given. Servants were expected to anticipate their master's desires before a word was spoken, to maintain perfect discretion, to move quietly and efficiently, as though their very existence were meant only to support the lives of others. In return, they were given room and board, modest wages, and the occasional fleeting acknowledgement for a job well done. Yet beneath the veneer of obedience, resentment often simmered. Long hours, harsh discipline, verbal humiliation, and physical punishment created a pressure cooker environment, where small grievances could grow unchecked into deep, bitter grudges. Many servants were young women and men removed from their families, thrust into a world of strict rules and near-constant scrutiny. They had little recourse if mistreated, no voice to defend themselves against unfair treatment, and no escape from the oppressive hierarchy that placed them at the bottom of every social interaction. It was in this climate of tension and secrecy that seeds of dark intentions were sown. The households that seemed most orderly were often the most volatile behind closed doors, and the servants who appeared most loyal could harbor thoughts that were anything but benign. The contrast between public appearances and private reality was stark. Families went about their daily lives in confidence, believing that their servants were devoted, that their homes were safe, and that the rituals of household management ensured security. Meanwhile, in kitchens, pantries, and servant quarters, resentments festered, subtle acts of rebellion took shape, and the quiet plotting of vengeance began to take root. Small incidents, an overheard insult, an unjust reprimand, a perceived slight, could linger in a servant's mind for years, growing into a slow-burning rage that was as silent as it was dangerous. The intimacy inherent in domestic service created a strange paradox. Those closest to the family, those who knew its rhythms, its weaknesses, and its secrets, were also those most capable of betrayal. This was not merely speculation. History tells us that servant-led crimes, particularly those involving poison, were a recurring nightmare for wealthy households. The threat was invisible, methodical, and deeply personal. Unlike a burglar or a stranger, the servant had constant access to the household, could move freely without suspicion, and could manipulate food, drink, and medicine in ways that left no immediate trace. The trust placed in them became a weapon against those who extended it. A master could sleep in the belief that their loyal cook had prepared their supper with care, only for that same meal to contain a substance that would slowly, silently, claim life. A family could celebrate a birthday, a holiday, or a quiet evening together, unaware that a shadow moved among them, patient and deliberate, ready to exploit the smallest lapse in vigilance. It was this duality, the outwardly perfect servant and the hidden malice, that gave rise to some of the most shocking events in London's history. The households that appeared secure were often the most vulnerable, and the lives of the privileged could be extinguished with horrifying ease. For every anecdote of a devoted footman or a faithful maid, there existed another story of manipulation, betrayal, and murder, stories so chilling that they would later capture the imagination of writers, historians, and true crime enthusiasts alike. The city itself seemed complicit in this tension, its narrow streets and fog-laden alleys hiding secrets at every turn, reinforcing the sense that danger could spring from the most familiar places. Even within the social structures of the time, the servants' world was a perilous one. Advancement was rare, and opportunities for escape or independence were limited. The few who did rise in station often retained memories of humiliation, fostering a lingering bitterness that could erupt under the right circumstances. Some servants, driven by desperation, greed, or the desire for vengeance, began to consider possibilities that would horrify their employers: slow-acting poisons, tampering with food and drink, and the creation of circumstances that made sudden deaths appear natural. They learned to disguise their intentions beneath layers of civility, to smile while harboring murderous thoughts, and to navigate the household as both loyal helper and secret predator. By the time Halloween approached, when shadows lengthened and superstition ran high, these tensions were at their most dangerous. Families, preoccupied with their own lives and festivities, rarely noticed the subtle glances exchanged in the kitchen, the whispered warnings among maids, or the small, deliberate errors that hinted at something far darker. The servants, patient and observant, had become experts in concealment, their knowledge of poisons, timing, and household routines combining with personal grievances to form a deadly calculus. The stage was set for horror not as a random act, but as the inevitable conclusion of years of resentment and careful planning. In these mansions of London, where elegance masked secrecy, where trust masked latent danger, the invisible threat of domestic betrayal loomed larger than any ghost or legend. The perfect household, so meticulously maintained and respected, was in reality a fragile construct, vulnerable to the quiet fury of those who served it. As the city continued its daily rhythm, unaware of the impending tragedies, the seeds of a terrifying nightmare had already taken root, waiting only for the right moment to bloom into chaos, fear, and death. The story that would unfold was not of external invaders, nor of random violence, but of those who were always closest, always trusted, and always capable of inflicting unimaginable harm. The shadows behind London's mansions were long, and within them, the first whispers of revenge began to stir. The life of a servant in 18th-century London was one of constant surveillance, obedience, and relentless expectation, a life in which the smallest misstep could lead to public humiliation or physical punishment. Yet beneath the layers of duty and submission, human emotions simmered. Anger, envy, and resentment often brewed in silence, unnoticed by the families who believed themselves secure in their households. A harsh word from a master, a reprimand for a trivial error, or a perceived insult could linger in a servant's mind for days, months, or even years, growing into a festering grudge that would eventually demand attention. These grudges, often invisible to the casual observer, were the unseen engines of some of the most chilling acts of domestic crime. Servants, accustomed to hiding their true feelings behind smiles and obedience, learned to mask their intentions, creating a dangerous duality between outward loyalty and inward hostility. Some of the earliest documented cases of servant-led poisonings illustrate how seemingly ordinary grievances escalated into something far more sinister. A cook slighted for a misspoken word might begin experimenting with small doses of arsenic in the kitchen, initially as a way to vent frustration and later as a methodical plan for revenge. A footman constantly belittled by his master might manipulate the family's meals or medicine, testing the limits of his access and the vulnerability of those above him. These acts, while initially subtle, often became ritualized over time, with the servant carefully monitoring reactions, adjusting quantities, and refining their methods. The sense of control, combined with years of unaddressed anger, created a dangerous psychological feedback loop. The more hidden their acts of defiance remained, the bolder their intentions became. Psychologically, the motivations of these servants were complex. They were not merely acting out of cruelty. Many felt a profound sense of injustice. The rigid hierarchy of London's households left them powerless to challenge authority openly, so their revenge took forms that were covert, meticulous, and deeply personal. Unlike street criminals or opportunistic thieves, these individuals understood their targets intimately, their schedules, their preferences, their weaknesses. This knowledge made the acts of poisoning not only effective, but also highly symbolic. Every meal served, every sip of tea offered, became an instrument of quiet vengeance, a calculated assertion of agency in a world that denied them any overt power. The irony was both cruel and haunting. The very people who were considered most submissive, who appeared to serve faithfully without complaint, were capable of harboring thoughts that could destroy the lives of those who trusted them most. Many servants were young, often far from their families, with limited education and few opportunities for independence. They lived in close quarters with others in similar positions, where whispered conversations and shared complaints could amplify discontent. Stories of mistreatment spread quickly, and collective grievances sometimes strengthened the resolve of individuals, creating a network of silent support for acts that would otherwise remain private fantasies. In some cases, jealousy and competition among servants themselves intensified the desire for revenge. A maid who saw her colleague praised for efficiency or rewarded with better living quarters might feel overlooked, her resentment intertwining with pre-existing anger at the family she served. The household became a pressure cooker of emotion, each grievance adding another layer to a psychological foundation built for eventual destruction. Historical records indicate that resentment did not always manifest immediately in violence. Often it smoldered quietly, a patient fire waiting for the right conditions to ignite. Servants observed, listened, and memorized, turning ordinary duties into reconnaissance for future acts of sabotage. They learned when a master drank his tea, when a child was most vulnerable, and when a family's attention was divided. This intelligence gathering was not accidental, but born of years of necessity. The social structure of the time forced them to conceal their true feelings and intentions while simultaneously nurturing them, an internal tension that sharpened both cunning and patience. By the time action was taken, the servant had often planned for months, if not years, ensuring that the resulting chaos would be maximized. The most chilling aspect of these grudges was how personal they became. Unlike crimes of passion in public spaces, these acts occurred within the intimate environment of the home, where victims were meant to feel safe. The psychological betrayal ran deeper because it violated trust. Families believed in the loyalty of those around them, unaware that the hands preparing their meals or drawing their baths might also be plotting their deaths. Every act of service carried the potential for harm, a perverse inversion of the trust that had been painstakingly cultivated. In some cases, the servants' own identities became bound to their acts of vengeance. The more they nurtured their grudges, the more the desire for retaliation defined their daily existence. By examining these historical incidents, one begins to understand the delicate interplay between power, subservience, and human emotion. The servants who carried out these acts were neither monsters in the conventional sense, nor merely victims of circumstance. They were individuals navigating a world that denied them agency, forced into invisibility, and left with the simmering desire to assert control in ways society could not anticipate. Their grudges, though hidden in silence, shaped the course of events in ways that would shock the broader public when finally revealed. Each act of revenge was the culmination of years of suppressed anger, carefully orchestrated and profoundly intimate, demonstrating how human emotion, when restrained and unacknowledged, can transform into something lethal. The contrast between the servants' outward demeanor and their inner world created an enduring fascination. To historians, true crime enthusiasts, and storytellers alike, these incidents reveal a timeless truth: that resentment, when nurtured in secrecy and combined with opportunity, can become as deadly as any weapon. The quiet, unnoticed grudge that begins as a fleeting thought can evolve into meticulously planned homicide, leaving destruction in its wake. In the grand houses of London, the seeds of such vengeance were planted long before the first acts of poisoning, invisible yet potent, waiting for the moment when silence would give way to horror. It was a world where quiet patience and bitter calculation intersected, a world that would soon erupt into events no one could have foreseen, changing the lives of everyone within those walls forever. The early signs of terror were subtle, almost imperceptible, yet they were the first threads in a dark tapestry that would soon unravel with devastating force. In the quiet kitchens and pantries of London's grand homes, seemingly mundane acts of service took on a sinister dimension. Tea prepared with meticulous care, meals laid out with precision, medicines administered with routine diligence, all became vehicles of invisible danger. At first, the effects were almost laughable in their subtlety. A slight dizziness after breakfast, a mild nausea following an afternoon meal, a cough that lingered longer than expected. Families dismissed these symptoms, attributing them to fatigue, seasonal illness, or the occasional lapse in diet. Yet the servants, those who orchestrated these early horrors, watched and measured reactions with a patience that bordered on obsession. Every shiver, every complaint, every glance of discomfort was a data point, a confirmation that their careful manipulations were effective and that their hidden vendetta could unfold with precision. The victims themselves were unaware of the looming threat. They went about their days, trusting in the familiarity of their homes and the apparent loyalty of those around them. Children laughed in playrooms. Women tended to social obligations. Men conducted business or leisure, all oblivious to the slow, invisible hand shaping their fate. Poison, unlike a dagger or a gun, allowed the perpetrator to strike without immediate detection. A pinch of arsenic in a pudding, a few drops of laudanum in a medicinal tonic, a subtle alteration in the preparation of food that seemed trivial. All of these became instruments of control and terror. The servants, those who were thought to be ordinary and obedient, transformed their environment into a theater of quiet menace, turning domestic routines into rituals of impending death. As these first acts of malice began, the atmosphere within the households changed in ways that were imperceptible to most, yet tangible to those attuned to subtle shifts. Candles flickered against walls as if acknowledging the growing tension. Drafts carried an eerie chill through rooms that had previously been warm and secure, and the laughter of children occasionally faltered, replaced by sudden tears or unexplained discomfort. Neighbors, when visiting, commented on a certain pall over the households, a shadow of unease that seemed out of place among well-kept parlors and elegant furnishings. The city itself, with its narrow streets and thick fog, seemed to mirror this quiet terror, concealing danger in its misty lanes and echoing the hidden threats within the walls of these grand homes. Historical accounts reveal the horrifying reality behind these initial signs. In one household, a respected matron complained of persistent stomach pains that physicians dismissed as minor digestive issues. Meanwhile, the cook, a seemingly devoted and humble woman, carefully monitored her condition, adjusting the doses she administered with a calculated precision. In another home, a young child became unusually lethargic, prompting concern from the mother, who never suspected that the family maid's tender care was the very source of the child's suffering. These cases were not isolated. They were part of a pattern that reflected both the skill and the patience of the perpetrators. Unlike sudden, passionate crimes, these poisonings were acts of meticulous planning, designed to maximize impact while minimizing suspicion. The horror lay not only in the act itself, but in the knowledge that it could be repeated, refined, and scaled to devastating effect. The servants, aware of their intimate knowledge of household routines, exploited every opportunity with chilling efficiency. They knew when the family would be distracted, when visitors would arrive, and when the physician's attention would be momentarily diverted. In many ways, the households became laboratories of human vulnerability, with the unsuspecting family members unwittingly participating in experiments of life and death. Meals were prepared with care and poisoned with precision, each serving a silent message. Trust can be fatal, and those closest to you may be the greatest threat. The psychological terror was as potent as the physical danger, for families began to experience inexplicable illnesses, fleeting moments of panic, and the creeping realization that something was amiss, though no evidence could yet be identified. The slow escalation of these acts amplified the tension within the home. Initially dismissed as coincidence or minor illness, the symptoms soon grew in intensity, sparking whispered speculation and growing unease. Conversations became cautious. Glances were exchanged in hallways and parlors, as family members began to sense that the ordinary rhythms of their lives were being subverted by an unseen force. Servants, meanwhile, maintained their masks of loyalty, continuing their duties with unerring attention to detail, all the while nurturing the dark satisfaction of their hidden power. The contrast between outward normality and inward menace was stark, creating a suspenseful tension that permeated every corner of the household. The first victims, though unaware of the true danger, were already caught in the tightening grip of this silent horror. Their bodies, subtly undermined by poisons, betrayed them in ways that medical knowledge of the time could barely explain. Weakness, dizziness, and fever were attributed to natural causes, yet each incident brought the household closer to an irreversible tipping point. As the servants continued their covert acts, they honed their methods, experimented with dosages, and observed the results with a meticulous attention to detail. The quiet, almost imperceptible signs of suffering that began as minor discomfort would soon snowball into catastrophe, setting the stage for a night of horror that no one in London could have imagined. By the time the households began to sense that something was deeply wrong, it was already too late. The servants had tested boundaries, ensured their methods were effective, and prepared for the ultimate act of vengeance. What began as subtle disturbances, the fleeting dizziness, the mysterious coughs, the sudden weakness, had escalated into a web of calculated terror, weaving together years of resentment, patient observation, and deliberate manipulation. In those early, almost invisible acts, the seeds of a massacre were planted, a chilling testament to how silently and efficiently human malice could operate when cloaked in service, obedience, and trust. The first signs of horror were more than warnings. They were promises of the darkness to come. The night air in London carried an unusual chill that Halloween, the eve of All Hallows, seemed to amplify. Streets were deserted as the city's fog rolled between lamplight, and the grand homes, once warm and bustling, felt ominously quiet. Within these mansions, servants moved with quiet precision, their outward demeanor unchanged, yet beneath their calm masks, a calculated tension electrified every action. This was no ordinary night of routine service. It was the culmination of months, perhaps years, of careful planning, observation, and simmering resentment. Every footstep, every clink of a spoon, every carefully prepared dish was a part of a silent orchestration of horror. The family, absorbed in their celebrations, remained blissfully unaware of the invisible danger that surrounded them, trusting in the loyalty of those closest to them, unaware that trust would become their undoing. As the evening progressed, the scene within the grand houses took on a deceptively festive tone. Candles flickered on mantelpieces, casting dancing shadows across walls adorned with portraits and tapestries. The table was laid with extraordinary care, a feast prepared with precision, reflecting both opulence and routine. Children laughed at small games, parents exchanged polite conversation, and servants moved about silently, attending to every need without interruption. Yet the laughter, the cheer, the apparent order, were all a thin veneer covering a meticulously crafted web of destruction. Beneath the surface, poison had already begun its deadly work, subtly integrated into puddings, sauces, and spiced drinks. The first sips, the first bites, carried within them a promise of slow, unrelenting suffering, a lethal secret hidden in plain sight. The perpetrators, having studied the rhythms of the household, struck at precisely calculated moments. The servants knew when each family member would be distracted, when conversations would mask their actions, and when the victims would least suspect betrayal. Timing was everything. A hurried gesture, a casual glance, or a seemingly innocent correction of a child's behavior could cover the administration of a small dose, barely detectable, yet potent enough to start the cascade of horror. It was methodical, patient, and chillingly precise. By the time anyone realized that something was amiss, the seeds of devastation had already been planted. What began as a familiar scene of domestic life, meals shared, laughter exchanged, music played, transformed silently into a theater of death, where the performers and the victims were unknowingly cast in roles that had been determined long before the night began. Panic and confusion soon replaced calm as the first signs of poisoning became unmistakable. Family members, once laughing, began to slump in chairs, clutching stomachs, coughing, or staggering with dizziness. A sense of dread filled the rooms as the severity of the situation became apparent. Servants, maintaining outward composure, subtly guided the chaos to prevent interference, ensuring that the unfolding tragedy proceeded according to plan. The irony was harrowing. Those who were supposed to be safe in their homes, shielded by walls and wealth, found themselves utterly powerless against the quiet precision of betrayal from within. Friends and neighbors, called upon in desperate attempts to assist, could only watch helplessly, unable to counteract the meticulous plotting of those who knew the household better than anyone. The chaos escalated with terrifying rapidity. Children, too young to comprehend the danger, screamed, their cries echoing through hallways that had always seemed secure. Parents, in the throes of panic, attempted to rally strength and courage, seeking help or explanations. Yet the invisible hand of poison continued its work. The room that had been a scene of comfort and celebration became a chamber of suffering, with every corner hiding a different manifestation of the servant's carefully executed vengeance. The psychological horror was amplified by the juxtaposition of familiarity and betrayal. The victims struggled to reconcile the kindness of the past with the lethal reality of the present. By the time the household fully realized the scale of the massacre, the damage was irreversible. Some succumbed quickly, their bodies overwhelmed by the toxins. Others lingered, racked by pain, confusion, and fear. The servants, in contrast, remained eerily composed, a horrifying reminder of the duality that had allowed this tragedy to unfold. In the aftermath, as the family collapsed and the living attempted to flee, the careful orchestration of the massacre left a scene of devastating order. Furniture remained intact, valuable items untouched, and the outward semblance of the household preserved, making the invisible horror all the more grotesque. The meticulous nature of the crime underscored the psychological depth of the perpetrators. This was not random violence, but deliberate, personal, and profoundly intimate destruction. News of the massacre spread quickly, shocking both the immediate community and the wider city. London, accustomed to tales of crime and misfortune, found itself confronted with something far more horrifying. The realization that the greatest danger could come from those most trusted, the servants who had been silent witnesses to the family's life and routines, now revealed as agents of their destruction. The story became an instant sensation, whispered in markets, discussed in taverns, and recounted with disbelief in salons. Public fascination mingled with horror as people tried to comprehend the audacity, patience, and malevolence required to orchestrate such a night of death. The Grand Halloween Massacre was not merely a crime. It was a dark reflection of the complexities of human emotion, social hierarchy, and the vulnerabilities inherent in domestic life. It revealed the terrifying potential of grudges nurtured in silence and the deadly consequences of underestimating those considered subordinate or invisible. In the shadows behind London's mansions, patience, resentment, and meticulous planning had converged into an event that would be remembered for centuries, a chilling reminder that horror often lurks in the most familiar places, and that betrayal, when executed with careful precision, can be far more devastating than any external threat. In the aftermath of the Halloween Massacre, the grand homes of London were transformed from spaces of domestic routine into scenes of unimaginable horror. The sudden and unexplained deaths of entire families left neighbors, authorities, and the wider public reeling, searching for explanations in a city that prided itself on order and civility. Physicians were summoned to examine the sick and the deceased, their knowledge limited by the medical understanding of the time. Symptoms that modern eyes might attribute to poisoning, nausea, vomiting, convulsions, and fever, were initially dismissed as foodborne illness or sudden contagion. But as more families reported similar tragedies, a pattern emerged that could no longer be ignored. The authorities, faced with the unimaginable scale and precision of these events, realized they were not dealing with chance or misfortune, but with deliberate, methodical acts of murder. Detectives and magistrates of the era approached the investigation with a mix of curiosity and dread. London had its share of crime, but nothing prepared them for the revelation that those closest to the victims, the trusted servants, could be the perpetrators. Interviews were conducted with surviving family members, neighbors, and any witnesses, but the answers were limited. Fear and confusion filled the air as investigators pieced together timelines, retraced meals, and meticulously examined the routines of the households. The servants, outwardly calm and cooperative, presented a carefully curated facade of loyalty, masking the depth of their involvement. Each question posed by an authority figure was met with rehearsed responses, polite gestures, and an appearance of innocence, forcing investigators to look beyond the surface and search for subtle inconsistencies that might betray guilt. Physical evidence in the 18th century was rudimentary, yet persistent observation revealed disturbing clues. Food preparation methods, the storage of medicines, and the timing of illnesses were scrutinized. Physicians noted patterns in the onset of symptoms. Specific dishes consistently preceded sickness, certain beverages caused delayed reactions, and medicines prescribed by the household doctor appeared to exacerbate conditions rather than alleviate them. The realization was chilling. The poison was administered with both knowledge and intent, exploiting the natural trust that families had placed in their servants. In some cases, experiments conducted under the guidance of physicians confirmed suspicions, demonstrating the lethal potency of arsenic, laudanum, and other common household toxins. Every detail reinforced the notion that these were not random acts, but the product of careful planning and intimate knowledge of the household. The tension in the city grew as the investigation unfolded. Rumors spread quickly, feeding public fascination and fear. Taverns, markets, and drawing rooms echoed with speculation about the hidden lives of servants and the extent of their cunning. People whispered about secret alliances, long-held grudges, and the possibility that every household in London might conceal a similar horror. This social panic reflected both genuine fear and morbid curiosity, a combination that historians would later recognize as a hallmark of public reaction to shocking crimes. Londoners, accustomed to a veneer of civility and social order, were forced to confront the unsettling reality that trust and familiarity could be weaponized with devastating effect. Eventually, confessions began to emerge, each one more horrifying than the last. Servants who had participated in the poisonings, confronted by mounting evidence and the weight of their own guilt, provided accounts that revealed both the meticulous planning and the psychological motivations behind the massacre. Some described years of mistreatment, neglect, and humiliation, which had fermented into a calculated desire for vengeance. Others spoke of envy and ambition, a desire to assert power in a world that had denied them agency. The confessions, often delivered with chilling calm, revealed an unsettling truth. The perpetrators had not acted in moments of uncontrolled rage, but with cold deliberation, orchestrating the deaths of those they served with precision and patience. Courtrooms became theaters of horror as the trials commenced. Judges, lawyers, and juries struggled to comprehend the scale of deceit and malice that had unfolded behind the doors of what were thought to be secure, respectable homes. Witnesses recounted the events leading up to the massacre, describing subtle signs of tension, small acts of sabotage, and fleeting glimpses of malevolent intent that had gone unnoticed by those who should have been most vigilant. Each revelation added layers to the narrative, exposing the psychological complexity of both perpetrators and victims. The servants, once invisible, were suddenly the focus of public scrutiny, their every action dissected for evidence of motive and method. The contrast between their outward subservience and their hidden cruelty left the city both horrified and captivated. By the conclusion of the investigations, the full scope of the massacre had been revealed. London's authorities had pieced together a timeline, documented the methods, and exposed the network of grievances and resentments that had culminated in this unprecedented tragedy. Families mourned their losses, communities grappled with fear and disbelief, and the broader society began to confront uncomfortable questions about class, trust, and power. The revelations demonstrated that violence was not always external, not always sudden or random, but could emerge from the most familiar and seemingly harmless individuals. The investigation, while bringing some measure of justice, also left a lingering unease. A city now aware that the hands preparing its meals, polishing its floors, and tending its fires could also be agents of death, moving silently in plain sight. patient, and calculating, until the perfect moment to strike. The motives behind the Halloween poisonings were as complex as they were chilling, revealing the darkest corners of human emotion when constrained by social hierarchy and circumstance. The servants who carried out these acts were not mindless killers. They were ordinary individuals shaped by extraordinary pressures, living lives defined by obedience, invisibility, and relentless expectation. For years, they had endured humiliation, verbal chastisement, and physical punishment, all while navigating a world that denied them autonomy and recognition. The simmering resentment that accumulated over time became a powerful, almost tangible force, a psychological weight that demanded expression. Poison became the instrument through which they could assert control, a way to invert the rigid hierarchy of their existence, to assert power in a life designed to deny it. In the intimate environment of a household, where every movement, every meal, and every routine was visible to them, they discovered a terrifying opportunity, the chance to turn trust into terror. Psychologically, these acts can be understood as the intersection of anger, ambition, and meticulous planning. The servants were acutely aware of the inequalities that structured their lives. The families they served were privileged, secure, and often oblivious to the human cost of their domestic comfort. Every insult, every punishment, every minor slight became a marker of injustice, accumulating over years into a silent, simmering fury. Yet this fury was not expressed openly. The social structure prohibited direct confrontation, leaving resentment to fester and grow. As the desire for revenge solidified, it transformed into a methodical and patient calculation, one that required foresight, timing, and cunning. The servants honed their skills, studying reactions, perfecting doses, and learning the precise rhythms of their targets, until their dark intentions could be executed with lethal precision. The broader societal context amplified these psychological pressures. Servants were often young, removed from familial support, and confined to living quarters that allowed little privacy. Social mobility was rare, and independence was a distant dream for most. In this constrained existence, grievances that might otherwise dissipate became enduring obsessions. Interpersonal tensions among servants themselves could further intensify feelings of injustice, as competition for favor, recognition, or promotion added additional layers of resentment. The household, ostensibly a place of order and civility, became a crucible in which grievances were compounded, alliances were formed, and vengeance was meticulously planned. These acts of murder were thus not only personal but social, reflecting the broader power dynamics of a society structured by rigid class hierarchies. Moral ambiguity also played a crucial role. The servants' actions were born from perceived injustice, yet the consequences were devastating. Their meticulous planning ensured the deaths of entire families, children included, raising profound ethical questions about the extent to which oppression can justify violence. From a historical perspective, these events highlight the tension between empathy and morality, demonstrating that when individuals are pushed to the margins of society, human emotion can manifest in destructive ways. The duality of these perpetrators, the capacity for both care and cruelty, obedience and malevolence, underscores the complexity of human nature. These were people capable of tenderness in ordinary interactions, yet lethal in moments when years of suppressed resentment erupted. The tools of vengeance, particularly poison, reveal the psychological depth of these crimes. Poison allowed servants to act surreptitiously, to transform ordinary domestic objects into instruments of death. Meals became a canvas for control, medicine became a vehicle of terror. The precision required to execute these acts demanded patience, intelligence, and an intimate understanding of human behavior. It was a form of psychological warfare, where the killer's knowledge of the victim's routines, preferences, and vulnerabilities became a weapon. The horror was intensified by the contrast between ordinary domesticity and hidden malice. Family members were betrayed by those they trusted most, and the violence was administered with a calm deliberation that magnified the terror. Historically, these events also reflect the dangers inherent in rigid social hierarchies. The servant-master relationship, structured around obedience and invisibility, created conditions in which hidden resentment, could fester and escalate. The very institutions designed to maintain social order inadvertently provided the tools for subversion and revenge. Trust, once absolute, became a vulnerability. Intimacy, once a marker of loyalty, became a pathway for betrayal. In this sense, the Halloween poisonings were not only acts of personal vengeance, but also a reflection of societal flaws, a dark mirror of the inequalities and tensions that structured everyday life. Ultimately, the dark motives behind these poisonings illuminate both the individual and collective shadows of humanity. They reveal how ordinary emotions, anger, envy, humiliation, can be transformed into extraordinary violence when combined with opportunity, knowledge, and patient calculation. They highlight the fragility of trust and the devastating consequences when social structures suppress expression and agency. And they leave an enduring lesson for history, that beneath the veneer of domestic order, beneath the apparent civility of household life, there exists a potential for darkness, a capacity for human shadows to emerge and reshape reality with lethal effect. The servants' actions, horrifying as they were, remind us that revenge, carefully nurtured and meticulously executed, can thrive in silence, lurking in the most familiar spaces and waiting for the moment to emerge with devastating clarity. The aftermath of the Halloween poisonings rippled far beyond the walls of the households in which the tragedies had occurred, leaving London and its citizens grappling with fear, disbelief, and a lingering sense of vulnerability. The massacre had exposed a chilling reality. The most trusted individuals, those who were meant to serve and protect, could become instruments of death. Families, neighbors, and society at large were forced to reconsider their assumptions about loyalty, trust, and the dynamics of power within the domestic sphere. For weeks, months, and even years, whispers of the poisonings spread across the city, evolving into stories that blurred the line between fact and legend. Londoners, though fascinated by the grotesque details, carried a pervasive unease, wondering if similar acts could be occurring behind the closed doors of other grand homes, hidden from the public eye. The legacy of these crimes extended into the very structure of domestic service itself. Household protocols were scrutinized and, in some cases, radically altered to prevent future tragedies. Employers became more cautious, implementing measures such as segregating duties, monitoring food preparation more closely, and limiting the freedom of servants within the home. The trust that had been an unspoken expectation was replaced by suspicion and oversight, fundamentally altering the relationship between master and servant. What had once been a dynamic defined by mutual dependence, however unequal, became one tainted by fear. Servants were now viewed not only as helpers but as potential threats, their every action observed and analyzed for signs of deceit. The invisible power dynamic that had allowed for subtle manipulations and clandestine vengeance was disrupted, replaced by an atmosphere of heightened vigilance. Public fascination with the events contributed to a broader cultural obsession with domestic betrayal and hidden malice. Newspapers and pamphlets recounted the horrors with sensational detail, emphasizing the psychological cunning of the perpetrators and the innocence of the victims. These narratives fed into a growing appetite for stories of secret crimes, revenge, and the dark undercurrents of human behavior, laying early groundwork for the literary and historical fascination with true crime. The poisonings became cautionary tales, invoked to illustrate the consequences of unchecked resentment and the dangers inherent in blind trust. They were studied not only for their historical significance, but also for the psychological lessons they offered, illuminating the extremes to which ordinary individuals could go when social pressures, resentment, and opportunity converged. The psychological imprint of the events persisted for generations. Families affected by the poisonings struggled with trauma, grief, and mistrust long after the perpetrators were punished or executed. Survivors and witnesses carried vivid memories of the horror, haunted by the faces of those who had succumbed and the calm composure of those who had enacted the crimes. Communities developed a heightened awareness of the complexities of human behavior, recognizing that appearances could be deceptive and that evil could thrive in spaces presumed safe. This awareness, though protective in some ways, also reinforced a culture of fear and suspicion, coloring interactions within households and neighborhoods alike. The societal lesson was harsh. Domestic peace was fragile, and the shadows within even the most esteemed homes could harbor lethal intentions. The legal and historical consequences of the poisonings were equally significant. Trials and investigations established precedents for how domestic crimes could be prosecuted, providing a framework for evaluating evidence, motives, and the roles of those in servitude. Physicians' testimonies, observations of symptom patterns, and accounts of household routines became essential tools in understanding and proving the crimes. These developments contributed to the evolution of forensic practices, even if rudimentary by modern standards, demonstrating the ways in which horrific events can catalyze systemic change. In a sense, the poisonings were a turning point, forcing society to reconcile its assumptions about class, morality, and the capacity for betrayal within the home. Literature, folklore, and later media drew extensively from the Halloween poisonings, weaving them into the cultural memory of London. Stories of trusted servants turned murderers became motifs in novels, plays, and sensationalist accounts, blending fact and fiction in ways that captured public imagination. The psychological duality of these individuals, the juxtaposition of apparent loyalty and hidden malice, became emblematic of broader fears about trust and social hierarchy. In popular imagination, the image of the quiet, obedient servant concealing deadly intentions became a recurring symbol of the dangers lurking beneath civility and order. This cultural legacy ensured that the events were not merely historical footnotes, but enduring lessons about human behavior, societal structures, and the fragility of trust. Ultimately, the Halloween poisonings left an indelible mark on both the social fabric and the collective consciousness of London. They exposed vulnerabilities within households, highlighted the dark potential of human resentment, and forced society to confront the uncomfortable truth that evil could exist in the most familiar and trusted spaces. The stories of these acts endured as warnings, resonating through generations as examples of the consequences of silence, neglect, and unchecked grudges. They reminded the living that the seemingly ordinary could conceal extraordinary danger, and that vigilance, though never a complete safeguard, was essential in a world where appearances could be fatally deceiving. In the shadows of London's grand homes, the memory of betrayal lingered, a testament to the dark complexity of human nature, and a chilling legacy that continues to fascinate and horrify to this day.